Castro from Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, for the last generation, you have a choice.
I'm the Republican candidate
I did
for
not
governor.
have sexual relations with
And I
that
realized
woman.
that this is something
Miss
he is
Lewinsky.
We're not going to
inherent.
be able to solve our problems if we get distracted by sideshows and carnival barkers.
One Republican, one Democrat, and you discuss the issues that matter in today's local, state, national, and global politics. Hosted by Steve Hickson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
I can't do that.
Hey, good morning, Cleveland. Good morning. Welcome to Backfire. We got a little change in the lineup this morning. We got John Stanberry this morning in the studio. Good morning, John.
Hey, Steve.
Got Ashley Ormby, another local attorney here in Cleveland, Tennessee, sitting in for Franklin this morning. Franklin, I think he had something he had to do in court this morning, or there was too many Obama screw-ups and he didn't want to be around this morning for it. I don't know. One of the two. But good morning, Ashley. Welcome.
Good morning, Steve. I was told we were going to talk about Tennessee football this morning, but I'm sort of got the impression it may change.
We can start by that. I thought the Big Orange looked great against Georgia this week.
Look good.
They look great. I was proud of them, just as proud as if they'd won myself. So,
Well, I'm feeling that way about Walker Valley, so, you know.
Walker Valley's doing a great job. That's right. Walker Valley's on the road. First time ever beating Bradley this past week, wasn't it?
Well, 2 weeks this Friday. They beat Polk County this last week pretty handily.
Well, what about Cleveland? When do they play Cleveland?
I'm not sure. Well, we have a bye this week, so they're off, so we'll have to see. I'm not sure when that game comes up.
Well, I'm proud of Walker Valley. They worked hard for many years trying to get there. You know, I guess one of the quick things we can talk about is the SP, what do you call the
SPCA.
SPCA, the Dog Lovers of the Cleveland Association. Anyway, Ashley, I know that you have nice pets, and you and your wife.
My dog goes to my office every day, Steve, and I think my clients, they enjoy him a lot more than they enjoy me.
Well, that's all right. That way you can keep you calm, right?
We had a cat in the office for 15 years before he passed away.
You know, there's a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people take their animals with them to work, and I'll be honest with you. I rented an office building to a couple of guys the other day, and they wanted a place. They had an internet business, and they wanted a place that they could keep their kids with them while their wives worked. They did internet work, and they were keeping the kids and a pet while the wives worked.
I think that's stylish with internet companies.
I think it must be. But anyway, I was proud of the guys. They were good fathers. Let's start out real quick with the security issue we've got at the White House. First of all, I'll go on record and say I think that they probably are shorthanded. And they brought some border patrol up from Mexico, and they're not used to catching anyone. So when they jumped the fence there, they just let them on in. So that's kind of anyway.
Well, you know, there was a discussion last night, though, that seriously, in Washington, the minute someone says, I take full responsibility, that means no one's going to actually take any responsibility. Right. And what happens is it actually ends up impacting people who had nothing at all to do with it. So the Secret Service's response so far has been they want to build another wall outside the fence and subject people walking on the sidewalk around the White House to increase scrutiny. So more of our fellow American citizens will be scrutinized when they had nothing to do with the screw-up. The screw-up wasn't on the outside of the fence. It was on the inside of the fence.
I got something I want to play for you real quick.
Can't hear it.
Go ahead.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I'm here today to address the concern that we all share following the incident of September 19th at the White House. It's clear that our security plan was not properly executed. This is unacceptable, and I take full responsibility, and I will make sure that it does not happen again.
At that point in time, they should have dismissed her. They shouldn't even question her anymore. They should have basically said that they're going to recommend her to be terminated.
Well, there's a lot of other things involved here. They've lied about it as well.
Oh, I know.
Because first they said, well, he got inside the front door. Well, now we find out not only did he get inside the front door, but he overpowered one of the agents inside, went past the stairwell going up to the First Family's residence, which effectively they had just left within minutes, apparently, of this happening. He made it down the hallway to the East Ballroom, to the back of the East Ballroom, before an off-duty Secret Service agent finally tackled him. There's a buzzer on the front door that had been disconnected because it was annoying the butler staff in the White House. There was no lock on the door. Nobody shot him. There are specially trained dogs on the grounds that are made to do this, weren't unmuzzled, weren't unleashed, and yet we're talking about building another little fence outside the main fence.
It's ridiculous.
I haven't really looked into it quite as deeply as John, but it seems like for the past 3 or 4 years, if there is a screw up to be made, either Secret Service or the CIA will do it. I'm just curious as to whether we need to take a real strong look at the Secret Service, see where they are, and whether Rick Perry said we don't need the EPA and 2 or 3 other things that he couldn't remember. But I'm sort of curious as to whether we do need to make some changes with the Secret Service, maybe do away with it entirely and start all over again.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree. We need to look at it. The problem is, once again, nobody, and this is not about this administration. This is about protecting the president, whoever is in office. Having said that, however, this administration has set a tone. No one is ever held accountable. And that's a tendency not of Democrats or Republicans. That's a tendency of government. When you don't hold people accountable, when no one ever loses their job for screwing up. Matter of fact, in this case, if they get to build this fence and they get to put increased scrutiny on the rest of American citizens, they've actually increased their power and authority through this. So they screw up and they get more power as a reward for that. That's part of the problem. Somebody needs to be held accountable.
Well, we've got to lead by example, and there's no examples been given.
By the way, this is not the only case. Did you hear what came out late yesterday?
The gun or something in the elevator. Tell me about that.
The president goes to visit the CDC. Now, apparently, they did make sure he didn't get into an elevator with an Ebola patient.
Wait a minute, I want to know what the
Center for Disease Control
in Atlanta.
Okay.
So they have a contract security guard in the elevator with him. He pulls out his cell phone and begins taking pictures and videos of the president, which the Secret Service agent felt was perhaps improper. So after they get off the elevator, he calls one of the other Secret Service agents over and says, go track that guy down, get him in a room and talk to him and find out what's going on. So they get him in a room with his supervisor. And he admits to the supervisor, yes, I was taking these pictures. The supervisor says, oh, that's terrible. Hand in your gun. That's the first point that the Secret Service knew he had a gun. So he hands his gun in. The agent is shocked that this guy was in the elevator with a gun. Then they say, well, let's do a background check. They find out the guy has a felony criminal record. So a convicted felon with a gun was allowed in the elevator with the president, unbeknownst to the Secret Service.
Now, I've been around a vice president one time when he flew into Jackson, Tennessee, and I happened to be there. And they shut down the whole airport over there. Nobody could come or go.
That's how it's supposed to be done, I thought.
I mean, I can't imagine somebody off the street in the elevator with the president of the United States. I mean, how did this happen?
That's just a breakdown in the Secret Service and their protocols. And from what you're saying as far as the director, she didn't quite answer the question about swearing under oath.
Right.
Yeah, that's the first problem. Hopefully they went back and addressed that. But at the same time, I think it needs to be looked at.
Well, you've got prostitutes. You've got drunk on the job in the last 4 or 5 years. George Will told an interesting story last night. He said that after the election and before the inauguration, he had the President-elect Obama to his house for a dinner party. I'm blanking out now. Charles Krauthammer was there. Several people were there. The neighbors across the street and their 4-year-old son came out in their yard and were looking at the motorcade come up and the president get out. Secret Service agent walked over, ordered them off their own lawn, told them they had to go back in their house because they couldn't be in their own yard. And, George was just making the point. You have the authority and you have this sort of bully power mentality to order someone off their own yard, but you can't keep a convicted felon with a loaded gun out of the elevator? There's a problem here.
I mean, that to me, just it's astonishing to me that this guy could be anywhere close to the president.
Well, even a contract employee is not supposed to have a gun unless he is specifically checked out and approved for that, much less one with a felony record.
Well, it just gets, last week I said something to Franklin about every week. Seems like something happens. The president gets shot in the foot or shoots himself in the foot, and Franklin got a little irritated
well, no
with
one's
me.
ever held accountable. That's
it's just for curiosity's sake, is everybody saying that the Secret Service screw up is the president's fault?
No, but the lack of accountability in this administration
Yes.
breeds this type of
Yes.
environment.
Yes.
So,
I think it's his fault in that he lets these agencies be so lax.
Let me ask you a question. What's happened to Lois Lerner?
Yeah.
What example did he set, his administration set, for someone who blatantly used her office for unconstitutional, illegal means? What example did he set?
Well, to my understanding, the Lois Lerner case is still going on.
Well, the Justice Department actually has refused to investigate it.
Everything Obama's got still going on. There's nothing been resolved.
To this day, Eric Holder has refused to investigate that.
Well, let me ask this: what should be happening to Miss Lerner? And to my
she
understanding,
should have been prosecuted immediately.
Hang on. To my understanding, she was reviewing in organizations that were basically they were looking for tax-free exemptions. And they were basically, some of them, I don't know all of them, were not really, how would you say, for the government or interested in doing things with the government or could possibly be anti-government. That's what I understand. Now, what should have happened to her?
Well, is that illegal?
I don't know. That's what I'm trying to
wait a
figure out.
minute.
You're saying it is. You're saying it
Actually,
is.
I want to make sure I understand you right. Anybody that apparently opposing the government is now, I guess, illegal, and you're not allowed to do that?
No.
Because Hitler and Stalin would really appreciate that attitude.
Right. Let's see. It's about 1:45, and we're already talking about Nazis. So, yeah, okay, all right. We're there.
No, we're talking about totalitarianism, which is what Lois Lerner was heading down that road. If government doesn't agree with you, government will bring the power to bear, which, by the way, the taxpayer funds to shut you down. That's what was illegal about what she's doing. Eric Holder and his Justice Department to this day has refused to investigate her. So when you talk about we don't know the answers, Eric Holder has refused, the head justice official in the country has refused to even investigate it.
If we have an organization that possibly has some anti-government issues or maybe something there, I think the government or the IRS or anybody else has a duty or obligation to look into it. That's
well, one of her justifications was if they use the word taxpayer or constitution.
If there's something there. I know sometimes when you're in criminal court, when I'm in criminal court sometimes, I'm looking at something. That doesn't mean that somebody's done something wrong, but I am looking at something other that involves some criminal culpability. That's sort of the deal.
Well, do you destroy your emails about that afterwards?
And so I'm assuming that's what part of that was. No, I don't destroy emails.
Well, now, the president himself said he was outraged originally, and then he did nothing. So is he still outraged, or is he not outraged anymore?
Well, I don't know if that's the president's obligation.
It was his word,
I don't know
outraged.
I don't know if that's the president's job.
Is it
to take
the
actions
Justice
against
Department's
Ms. Lerner.
job?
I have.
No, wait a minute. I want to.
I have no idea. But
Lois
I'm saying,
Lerner is one of the head people in the IRS, and you're telling me that the president's not really responsible for managing that department.
That's not his oversight. I don't know.
Oh my gosh! So in other words, if the Navy SEALs killed Bin Laden, he was responsible for that. Matter of fact, he virtually pulled the trigger himself. But every other thing that screws up, he has absolutely nothing to do with. Is that it?
He was responsible for Benghazi too?
Yes, he was.
Okay. He's responsible for, let's see. I just don't think you can.
Well, if you want to go there, he was responsible for Fast and Furious. He was responsible for not prosecuting Muslim Black Panthers who were standing in front of polls with batons in their hands threatening white voters. He's responsible for all these things. The problem is he hasn't done anything. He's not been a president for everyone. He's been a president for his people.
He's responsible for the junior varsity.
Junior
No.
varsity.
Clapper is, which that's an interesting argument there. James Clapper is at fault for not telling the president about this intel. Well, guess what, Mr. President? Why didn't you fire James Clapper last Sunday night? When you said that on 60 Minutes, he's your national security advisor. If he screwed up, why didn't you fire him?
I'm off on that one. Clapper, that's regarding which issue?
That's regarding ISIS and the president claiming that he didn't know about it.
He was getting bad information.
Well, actually, we
from
now
his
know
intelligence.
We have recorded data of congressional briefings, of all kinds of on-the-record comments going back to 2012 about ISIS and the growing threat. We know that it was in his morning briefing every morning for over a year, going back to last summer. But unfortunately, we also know that he only attended 42% of his presidential daily briefings over the entire term of his presidency. He was 43% the first 4 years. He's down to 42% this year. So less than half of the time he even gets his presidential briefing. But yet he's been able to go on 60 Minutes and blame the intelligence community for the failure to understand the threat of ISIS.
I can't believe he blamed somebody again.
Well, and of course, it's all water over the dam to a certain degree, but to my understanding in the Bush administration, they had all the evidence, or to a certain degree a lot of evidence about bin Laden coming to the country, all those issues, and the CIA had it, and if I'm not mistaken, after that took place, they went and gave the head of the CIA a Medal of Honor. So,
well, you're right, but Bush also learned from that. And what did he do? When the intelligence came in, he acted on it. Now, some of that intelligence in the Iraq War turned out to be false. So here we've got a President Bush being blamed for taking the safe approach and acting on intelligence and later finding out it's wrong. We've got another president who has intelligence, which is actually correct. He ignores it, doesn't act on it, and blames someone else.
I think that's the point. He had information, didn't act on it, and he made a similar mistake later on with Iraq, and that's sort of
this
where we are
president
now.
says it's not his fault for not acting on the ISIS information.
Well, I think at the time, to my understanding, I don't know how you could pull that out and say that's the most important part of what the president does.
Why would he make a comment referring to ISIS as junior varsity? And then, have things like this happen, and then he says that, he gets himself backed into a wall. He opens his mouth, backs himself up against the wall, and then he can't support what he said.
What do you mean by the junior varsity?
That's what he called them in February.
Well, that's what I'm
of
saying.
this
What
year.
did you feel they meant?
A junior varsity? I know what a junior varsity is. When you play sports,
it's
that's
not
the
that
B
big a
team.
deal, not
That's the B
important.
team. Something small, something not to worry about. They're not as good as the varsity.
Well, I think that's, to my understanding, they number somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 30,000. They have a lot of arms that they've taken, and they've taken over a bank or two, so they've got some money.
They're making $2 million a day in oil revenue.
That was, I think, before the strikes. And I'm not exactly sure whether that's going to be the same level as Al-Qaeda or some of the other areas over there. So it may be one of the smaller ones, and that's my understanding.
Well, according to McClatchy, which is actually a relatively liberal news organization, the United States had been closely tracking Al-Qaeda spinoff of ISIS since 2012, when it enlarged its operations from Iraq to the civil war-torn Syria, seized an oil-rich province there, signed up thousands of foreign fighters who had infiltrated Syria through NATO ally Turkey. They were well aware of it. They were told it was a threat, and he didn't act on it, as he's done on all kinds of issues through his presidency. And it came up, it not only bit him, it beheaded American citizens. And that's the only reason we're even doing anything. Which, by the way, if you want to talk about some irony, and this has slipped by, apparently the press isn't really concerned about this, the White House has now acknowledged for the first time that the strict standards that President Obama imposed a year ago to prevent civilian deaths in U.S. drone strikes will not apply to U.S. military operations in Syria and Iraq. So in other words, we're not worried about killing innocent women and children. And I'm just wondering, Ashley, maybe you can help me out. If President Bush had announced that he wasn't going to be concerned about civilian casualties, how would the press and the liberal progressives in the Democrat Party have treated that?
I really can't tell you, but to my understanding, based upon his administration that actively supported putting forth a message that was untrue to get us into the Iraq War.
Actually, all the intelligence.
Let me finish.
But it wasn't. You can't say it wasn't true because it was true.
No, it wasn't.
It proved to be wrong, but it was true at the time.
Ask Colin Powell.
Well, ask Hillary Clinton because she voted for it. Ask Ted Kennedy because he voted for it. Ask Joe Biden because he voted for it.
As I was about to say, John, as I was about to say, it was untrue. So whether they say it or not, I can't necessarily say. But at the same time, and I think this is a neat issue, John, and I'd sort of like to see what your attitude is. We are already bombing Iraq, which under the circumstances I think is probably necessary. Do you feel that we're going to be or need to put troops on the ground?
Well, I don't know. The Air Force thinks we will. The Army thinks we will. The Marines think we will. The Navy thinks we will. The intelligence security people think we will. Even Democrat lawmakers say we will.
Well,
but, you know, the president says,
what do you think? What do you think?
I
think it's a
mistake. We will. They say we should.
Have to. He said what they've all said is you can't do this from the air. It has to be accompanied by ground troops. My problem is when you're Ashley, let me put it to you this way. If a guy comes up and decides to pick a fight with you, and you look at him and you go, I just want you to know I won't hit you back. I won't hit you back at all. How good are you going to do in that fight? You don't put those kind of cards on the table. This president, now don't get me wrong, Republicans and Democrats are supporting him for the most part in this endeavor. I personally wish he had taken the advice he railed President Bush over and gone to Congress. Senator Corker wishes he had gone to Congress and gotten the authority, which he said Bush didn't do when he actually did.
I doubt if he's able to get anything from Congress.
Actually, they've all said that they would support this. They would authorize it. You know, the British Parliament didn't authorize it a year or so ago. They did just last week. So the British Prime Minister, Cameron, has the authority of his Parliament. This president is acting under an authority that just 2 months ago he said was illegal and should be repealed. And then he had the gall to turn around and say, I don't need an authorization for Congress because I'm going to act under the authority of something that I said was illegitimate in the first place. And by the way, just so you understand how this hypocrisy bounces
and that
around.
wasn't a question, right? It was just
July 2014. Now that's, 3 months ago. This is Ben Rhodes, who is the presidential spokesman. This is a tweet that he sent out. We do believe that Israel can do more to avoid the types of civilian casualties that we've seen. Now, September 2014, he sends out White House exempts Syria airstrikes from tight standards on civilian deaths. So 3 months ago, they chastised Israel for not limiting civilian casualties, and now they quietly say, oh, by the way, we're not going to really enforce our standards to limit civilian casualties. Ashley, I can tell you how the Bush administration would have been treated. They would have been run over and drugged for miles over this.
I don't know, but when you lie to a country and nothing happens, that's when I think you're.
Well, one, he didn't lie because, first off, U.S. policy was set by Bill Clinton in 1998, and it was all the Democrats that voted for the U.S. policy to remove Saddam Hussein from office. And every one of the people in 2004, 5, 6, and 7 who criticized this voted for it.
John, I think his policy was set by Dick Cheney, but what
no,
you just
it wasn't.
read,
it was set by Bill Clinton. I'll be glad to bring it into you.
What you just said regarding that, were you wanting to say that there was something about we need to be basically speaking with Israel about their attacks on civilians? And
I'm saying that the White House criticized them in July for the very policy that they've now quietly said they're going to follow.
Okay. Right.
My point is they're complete hypocrites. They criticize Israel for not doing enough to limit civilian casualties, and now quietly they've announced they're not going to follow their own policies to limit civilian casualties in the current bombing. Now, let me give full disclosure. I don't support limiting civilian casualties in an effort like this because I think it hamstrings your effort. The whole point of a war is to make it so miserable on the bad guy that he wants to quit. So
that's my understanding.
I'm not unsupportive of this policy, but I am unsupportive of the hypocrisy that this administration routinely employs.
They're doing what they're supposed to do, but because they said something earlier, it's bad.
No, what's happened is reality has kicked them in the teeth. They ought to be thanking George W. Bush because right now they are following every example that he set that they criticized.
Sounds like you're saying they're doing what they ought to do.
They are, which is what George Bush did all along, and you all criticized.
The problem is they waited too long to do it.
We're in this trouble because they failed to get a security agreement with Iraq to keep some forces in there, which if you'd like, we can play the press conference in 2007 where George Bush ticked off every single thing we're exposed to right now as what would happen if we precipitously removed our troops from Iraq.
Boy, I'm sure that would be a sterling
actually, it
time
is.
Of
it's actually quite scary because everything he says has already happened.
One thing about the president, and everybody says, well, he doesn't act fast enough. He doesn't act fast enough. He doesn't act fast enough. I think that's his way of looking at things. I think he is someone that sort of thinks things through, and I don't think he is going to act fast. I think that's sort of just his style.
Let me ask you something. From 1 to 10, how do you rate President Obama?
Well,
1 being the worst and 10 the best.
I would say he's somewhere in the 7 to 8 and 9, and I'm looking at it from this standpoint. He has been basically assailed at everything he's tried to do. He's been called a liar in his State of the Union speech.
Well, he did lie. Actually, what he said that about.
Hang on, John.
John.
John. Please,
so don't say it was a lie.
I'm trying to speak just a second. Okay, hold on. And during all this time, he's basically kept his composure. He hasn't lost his cool. Hang on. I'm just saying, if you want to know how to act in the face of just utter confunction, I think you need to look at the president. And I think basically just his actions.
Like Bush was?
Do what now?
Has he been called a Nazi like Bush was? Apparently, Bush must have been treated wonderfully according to this standard.
Well,
this is the only president in history that's had any kind of resistance. Poor Obama.
I have been to a couple of not Cleveland, but a couple of country clubs out of state after playing golf, and I've heard him call him some other words other than a Nazi.
They called Bush a lot of things,
and so that's what I'm saying. That's
killer.
The deal. But I'm just saying, from his standpoint, I think he's done a lot, and he's basically. And this is another thing. Steve, let me ask this, and maybe we can talk about this a second.
Okay.
What is a more important act? What is bigger? Putting a man on the moon, or insuring 30 million Americans? Which is bigger?
Or insuring 30 million.
He's not
Americans.
insuring 30 million. I'm glad you brought that up.
Are we talking about Obamacare here or what?
I think we're talking about expanded Medicare, and I think we're talking about
Obamacare will now cancel 50,000 more plans before November. So in the next month, 50,000. Actually, it's not from the Daily Caller. This was, for example, the Albuquerque Journal reported that 30,000 New Mexicans will lose their health insurance. Matter of fact, in Tennessee, 2,000 people will receive notices from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee because all the exemptions that were given to the existing plans, the people that had insurance but didn't meet the new dictated standard by all our intelligent people in D.C., will now be removed from the exemption that they had and forced to go get new insurance. So 50,000 people who had insurance are going to lose it this month alone because of Obamacare.
Okay, let's go back. 30 million insured, putting men on the moon.
Actually,
which
it's
is
not
better?
30 million. Right now we're up to maybe, 8 million, I think, and we don't even know of those how many already had insurance. The latest estimates from the Government Accountability Office say actually more people are uninsured now than before Obamacare.
Okay, okay, 8 million. Let's say 8 to 10. Which is bigger? 8 to 10 million.
Now you're talking about.
Actually, let me ask you something. We've got to take a break, but let me ask you something. Let me reverse the question.
Of course, we don't answer that.
If we're going to make a decision about Obamacare, do you think everybody ought to be involved in it?
And by everybody, you mean who?
Well, the Republicans that were elected who were actually literally locked out of the committee rooms when it was passed.
Well, I think we ought to put Chuck Flashman in there, and he'll say no.
Well, by the way, let me
he'll say no.
Wait a minute. Right there. Let's take a break, and we'll be back.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into Checking to cash.
The cash you need is closer than you think.
Get an auto title loan today for up to $2,500 at Check Into Cash.
You drive home with the cash in your pocket.
Visit Check Into Cash for an auto title loan today, or get a payday advance for up to $425. Call toll-free 877-262-CASH. Title loan amount determined by value of car and ability to repay. Borrowers often use payday advances over a period of months, which can be expensive. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
Guns, guns, and more guns. That's right, folks. U.S. Money Shops has just received a large shipment of pre-owned Glock 22s, 23s, and the awesome Beretta 8040D Cougar. These guns are law enforcement trade-ins that start at just $379.99 while supplies last. At U.S. Money Shops, there's no shortage of guns, so if you're looking for a great deal on a newer pre-owned gun, then check us out first.
Buy or sell or apply today. The better way at U.S. Money Shops.
Visit usmoneyshops.com for the location nearest you.
Wheeler Technologies has moved. Visit them at their new location at 490 Grove Avenue Southwest next to Bradley Rentals. Same great folks, same great service with a better location to serve you. Call Wheeler Technologies for voice, data, and security needs at 664-TECH. That's 664-8324. And remember, depend on Wheeler Technologies for the current time and temperature every day at 476-1111. Tennessee Alarm Contractor C1750.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little, or you can borrow big. Lending Frog is a new financial gig. It's hip to hop into cash. LendingFrog.com is making a splash. Dig it, dig it.
Friday. Come one, come all to the Cleveland Speedway. That's right. Race fans, are you ready for the thrill of down-home, high-speed, no-hold-back racing? Get ready for the all-new Cleveland Speedway. This Friday, racing comes back to Cleveland. It's time to get your dirt on. An all-new track, an all-new grandstand, and an all-new racing experience. The Cleveland Speedway this Friday. Bring the entire family. Gates open at 6:30. Racing starts at 7:30. If you love dirt track racing, get ready for the all-new Cleveland Speedway. This Friday, racing returns to Cleveland Speedway. Don't miss it. See you this Friday at the Cleveland Speedway. Friday.
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson on Whoop FM. Call 423-614-5553 to join in on the conversation. Now, back to Backfire.
All right, we're back in here with special guest Ashley Ormby this morning with John Stansberry and myself.
Appreciate y'all being nice to me this morning.
Well, I appreciate you including me in the crew. Because I think you're being generous, but I appreciate it.
I've got to ask something here. Now, you're an attorney, so I've got to ask this. And I guess this is going to, before I even ask it, I think I know what the answer is going to be. But the beheading recently in Oklahoma, is it workplace violence or is it a jihad incident?
I don't think it's a jihad. I think it was inspired by what's going on over with ISIS and those journalists. I think it's inspired by that, and it was a very, very, very sick individual. It's just sad. It's just sad.
Well, let me just make sure I understand the full level of coincidence here. He converted to Islam. He was actually fired over an argument where he said women should be stoned if they don't do everything that they're told. He has a website full of jihadi porn, basically.
Muslim porn.
It is. I mean, it's beheadings and executions, and he's got bin Laden on his website and bragging about him. He goes to his car, comes back with a knife, and apparently one of the women...
He went home and got the knife.
One of the women was actually one of the women he had an argument with, and he approaches her from behind, beheads her, and he has admitted to the officers that he was attempting to behead the second woman, and this is the way they've kind of covered this. They said he was mumbling, Islamic words. Now, the average American probably knows 4 or 5 Islamic words. Probably some of them would be the same one Captain Nidal Hassan said down at Fort Hood when he shot people up. But all of that doesn't make it any kind of connection to terrorism or to Islam. It's workplace violence, which, by the way, Colonel Hassan, the Fort Hood shootings, according to Eric Holder in the Justice Department, is still labeled as workplace violence, which, by the way, also keeps all of the people killed and wounded from getting any kind of awards, Purple Hearts. They don't get any kind of benefits for their injuries because we've politically decided to call that workplace violence. Now, is that the level of coincidence that we have to accept to not say this was, in fact, a Islamic attack?
Now, John, I was listening to a little of this last night, and basically what they're having to do, and Ashley, you help me with this, they have to go through the process of a trial.
Right.
They have to go through, the outcome should be the same, except for some of the rights you talked about there, but the outcome in this state does carry a death penalty.
Right.
So,
well, now they're trying to claim that it may just be race-related. It may be a black-white thing. Well, if that's the case, are they going to prosecute him under the hate crime laws?
I don't know whether Oklahoma has hate crime laws.
There
I'm sure there's a
hate
federal
crime laws.
hate crime laws, and I don't know where this is going to come to that. I've just not gotten the impression. I didn't know the gentleman was Muslim, but if he was, somehow I find it very hard to think there's a war going on in the middle of Oklahoma.
Well, when's the last time you heard of a beheading in America?
Well, I know I saw it on TV the other night. I think it was on the Sons of Anarchy. That was one that I don't know if that, but I'm just saying I can't tell you.
Well,
but I just don't think it's something other related to.
There's two things here. I think either the guy was just a sickie. He had heard about this. He had read about this. He saw it on television. He's a copycat type person to get the attention. Or I think, really and truly, if you look back at what he was doing, he was trying to convert employees to jihadism.
Well, according to one of the coworkers, when they asked him about it,
he had all kinds of stuff going on.
One of his coworkers said when they asked him about beheading, he said, "This is just what we do," in reference to his Muslim faith. And just so the president, I mean, I know he's confused now, even though he attended Islamic schools all through his time in Indonesia when he went to the public schools there, and he says that this is not a Muslim, Islam is not a faith that supports that. The Quran in 8:12 states, "I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Therefore, strike off their heads and strike off every fingertip of them." The Surah 47:4, 9:5, 9:29 says they demand brutal subjugation, torture, and execution of all unbelievers. But apparently the president missed that in his 2 to 3 years of education under an Islamic school system.
John, I went to a wonderful Baptist institution, Carson Newman. And in the Old Testament, they've got some pretty rough language, too.
Yeah, but the New Testament replaces the Old, and the Quran's actually the opposite. All of the quotations of peace are in the first book of the Quran. The second book explains that all of the teachings in the first book are relegated as secondary to the teachings in the second half of the book. The second half of the book is where it says, kill them all.
Well, I've just heard a lot of people say, if it's 4 corners of the Bible, by golly, I believe it. So we can all get a little. We can all get a little.
Apparently, didn't learn much about the Quran in his 3 years in Islamic schools in Indonesia.
Well, I think you can say various things about other people that.
By the way, this is a picture from the Muslim parade in New York City. Just so you understand the political correctness going on. Now, the theme of this parade, this was just last month, was Islam and America's shared common values. In the parade, there were flags of annihilation. There was the ISIS flag was carried. There were maps carried that didn't have the state of Israel on them. They were carrying guns and pointing them at people and acting like they were shooting people. Now, the police finally did come in and take the guns to make sure they weren't actual guns. There were pictures of women in cages. There was a picture of a woman being hung from a gallows in the parade. They were bragging about the Muslim Brotherhood, and all of this was to show their moderation.
So John, who reported that?
Well, this was actually reported all over the place.
Well, I mean, you've got something there. Who
This is
reported
from the Pamela Geller, which is a anti-Semitism activist.
Okay.
But it was reported in all kinds. It's happened in New York City. Look, there's your picture. The woman, the mannequin is hung from a gallows.
I have no idea.
Feel free to go on her website. You'll see pictures of the women in cages. You'll see pictures of the men holding AK-47s. Now, apparently they were, fake AK-47s, but there were pictures of the ISIS flag. There were maps without Israel on the map. And all of this is Islam's attempt to, quote, show America and Islam's shared common values. I'm sorry, I don't share any of these values.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Let me change the subject a minute. Eric Holder. What's your opinion of Eric Holder? You think he's done a good job, bad job, mediocre job?
Well,
no job.
Two things.
Any job.
Two things that stick out. First, he appointed my good friend Bill Killian as the U.S. attorney for this area, and Bill has been he's a wonderful person and a great attorney, and so richly deserving of that. Secondly, when North Carolina's legislature and governor got together and attempted to gloss over Duke Power and their pollution of some beautiful North Carolina land and streams, and they were in the process, and it was a serious pollution problem, and they were in the process of having the laws set so nobody could sue them, that the only person that could have any, I guess, or say they violated anything was a local environmental agency or the state environmental agency, and they were going to pay $100,000 for a horrible pollution. He in turn sent some U.S. attorneys down, and they are in the process of reviewing that at this time. There's a couple other actions like that he's taken. So from that standpoint, I think it is good that they're looking into it and seeing and trying to be a little bit oversight sometimes when states get out of control, especially like they are with pollution in North Carolina.
Well, who has oversight over his own men, say, for example, Fast and Furious? Who's been held accountable for Fast and Furious? What individual lost his job? What individual was prosecuted? No one.
Hadn't got to that.
So the Black Panthers standing outside the poll, which, by the way, the Bush administration, the Justice Department, career Justice Department, under the Bush administration, not political appointees, had already secured convictions on those men. Eric Holder came in, actually reversed it, and dropped all the charges. Explain that to the elderly white senior citizens that were trying to vote at that precinct, how justice was done by the senior elected or senior appointed law enforcement official in the country. Tell me how he did his job there.
You know, John, I really can't, and I'll tell you, the Fast and Furious, I just haven't been up to date on that, but talking about the elderly people not getting to the polls, I think the requirements now in the state of Tennessee that require someone to have a state photo ID vastly or grossly discriminates against elderly folks that can't get out, can't get this, can't get everything.
Do a lot of
together.
those elderly folks need government assistance?
Yes, I'm sure. Especially, I'm going to say my mother. My mother's 92.
Right.
She drives.
Can she get that?
Let me finish this. Let me finish.
Can she get it without a photo ID?
John.
Photo ID?
She's not the problem. She's
no.
not the problem.
I'm asking you.
But I'm saying right now, she's not the problem. But if she was unable to get out, if she was not, or she wasn't as active as she was, it would be a problem. I'd have to take her down to. Or I'd have to go. There is a process through the state where you don't have to have a state ID, but it's long drawn out and has to be done by telephone. That's what I think is something that should be looked at.
Let me ask you a question. Do most of these elderly need government assistance?
Well, I think all elderly after the age of 66 get
Wait a minute.
Security.
Well, let me ask you a question then. Here's my point.
Here, you're going to get Social Security here. You're lucky.
Here's my logical point, Ashley. You have to have a photo ID to get government assistance.
You have to have, I'm not sure.
You have to have a photo ID to get.
You may have a photo ID, but to vote, you have to have a
wait a minute. If you
ID.
have to have a photo, no, you don't. You have to have a valid photo ID.
It can be a federal one. You have to have a state.
No, the state was offered
that has to be there, and you have to go through another process.
If you're going to argue this point, you ought to at least understand the system. That state process was put in place because the progressive argued that a lot of these people don't have a federal ID, any kind of federal photo ID. So the state simply offered a free service to take care of that. And by the way, While we're
the
on
state
that,
offering a free service, and I'll just say as far as the state on that, I have the pleasure of dealing with the state from time to time, and being on the telephone with the state is a long, drawn-out process.
Well, that's an argument against Obamacare.
Any government, that's what I'm saying.
Well,
and
that's an
that
argument
makes it even
against
worse.
Obamacare, isn't it?
Pardon?
Isn't that an argument in and of itself against Obamacare?
Well, voting.
Why would you put the government in charge of our medical health if you don't trust them to issue a photo ID?
Who else is going to take care of our medical health if no one else
Well,
will?
we've done it for 200 years without the government.
And we've
by
had
the way,
people that haven't been
lady,
uninsured.
A state representative, Democrat up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, has been arrested on 19 counts of an imaginary crime. I know you're going to be upset about this, Ashley. State Representative
I'm already upset, John.
Christina Ayala has been indicted for voting by fraudulent means in 19 different elections. She turned in a address for a precinct that she didn't live in, and the commission has also recommended that criminal charges be filed against her mother. Oh, let me guess, the Democrat Register of Voters in Bridgeport, and as of Friday they haven't filed the charges against her mother. So apparently voter fraud never happened, so it's a shame that this woman, this Democrat elected official, has been indicted on 19 counts of an imaginary crime. Isn't that terrible?
John, I've never seen any report that shows that voter fraud is so rampant it changes election.
Well, in the Al Franken election, there were over 1,000 convicted felons that voted illegally. The margin of error was just slightly over 300.
I've never
seen
three
times his margin of victory.
Have you ever seen elections lost by one vote?
Nicholas Lilios won by 2 votes.
Oh, there was one who was at the local school board. Teddy Bryson lost by 1 vote.
Well,
and that was voter fraud for the school board.
That was 2 votes.
It was
2 votes, 1 or 2 votes.
Callaway, what's her name?
Jackie lost by 2 votes.
Jackie Callaway lost by 2 votes. 1 or 2 votes means a lot. So why should we take any risk with somebody that does have voter fraud?
Especially when they've already got to have a photo ID to check a book out at the Cleveland Public Library.
Well, let's make sure that we cut out about 300 or 400 that are qualified and make it harder for them so we can make sure one. That's sort of my point.
You don't have a problem then with what the Fords did out with their funeral home where they registered dead people and voted, probably, from what we understand, probably hundreds of them.
Oh, I have
so
a
you're
problem
okay with that?
I have a problem with anybody that skirts the law and does that, of course.
But you don't want to do anything to prevent it.
Who was the congressman that and this is people go to rehab for drugs and alcohol. I always thought
Jesse Jackson Jr.
Well, yeah, I was
Al
thinking,
Sharpton.
I was thinking about the congressman that should have went to rehab for congressional pages from Florida that had that problem. So,
well, actually,
we can always point to something other being a problem. Yes, they did this. Yes,
let's
they did
prevent
that.
it.
That doesn't mean that we have to go back and take draconian measures and just cut out people.
You're telling me a photo ID in today's society is a draconian measure?
For some people, it is,
well,
especially the elderly.
Guess what happened in the state of Georgia after they passed the photo ID laws? Minority voter participation increased significantly. About a 40% increase from one year to the next.
What about
after
elderly?
the voter ID laws were passed?
What about elderly?
It all increased. All the data increased. So all of the things that... Here's the problem. Who would be against making sure that you had a right to vote when you voted? Electing the most important people in our country to lead our lives and shape our lives and pass our laws, who would actually argue that we shouldn't make sure that only those people entitled to vote
If we open the gates to our borders, we at least got to protect our voting.
Unless, of course, you're a Democrat, and that's the reason you're opening the gates to our borders.
Not. So basically, Democrats want the borders to be open so they can get in power.
Most of this illegal voter fraud has been Democrats. I'll be glad to bring all the printout. I just told.
I'm sure you can find printouts, and I'm sure we can find printouts.
Al Franken's margin of victory was 1/3 the total number of convicted felons that illegally voted in that race. That doesn't bother you that 3 times a U.S. senator's margin of victory, 3 times that margin were actually illegal people voting that shouldn't have been voting.
John,
that doesn't bother you.
If I ran against Al Franken for the Minnesota Senate race, and I spent all the money that's required for a Senate race, and I did everything, and I worked, and I put it all together and did everything I was supposed to do, and I knew that 3,000 voters shouldn't have voted, then I think I would have filed something. I would have
He
spent
did
just a
file.
little bit of money, and then I think I would have taken it as far as I could have
Actually,
taken it.
he did file, and
I'm sure he did, and I'm sure he wasn't successful.
He wasn't. He finally quit.
He
because
wasn't
he
successful.
Said it was too much. It was doing too much damage to the fabric of the government. Now the problem is Al Franken didn't have the decency to go along and say, "I'll cooperate with this filing because I want it to be viewed as fair." Al Franken simply wanted his victory.
I think what you're saying is that was the allegation. It wasn't proven.
Actually,
he said he
the
pulled
convicted
off.
felons
and he
were
went from there.
proven.
Well, then they should have been pulled out, or I'm assuming they would have.
Well, but the election had already been certified at that point. My point simply is the liberals and the progressives claim voter fraud never happens. Happens all the time.
John, how can you certify an election when there's a lawsuit going on? To I guess
because he dropped his lawsuit.
Right, it was
reduce
afterwards.
the damage.
And that's the point I'm saying. He might have said that. That might have been the allegation, but it never was shown.
Well, actually, all right. Let me make sure I'm clear. He dropped it when it was an allegation. However, there were groups. There were, I believe it was one of the legal foundations that continued to pursue it, and they documented 1,100 convicted felons who illegally voted in that election, which is over 3 times the margin of victory. Now, it could have gone either way. Maybe they all voted for the Republican. Our point is simply that election fraud exists, and why would we not want to make sure that we safeguard the right to vote in America by making sure someone doesn't steal someone else's vote?
John, I've never seen anything to where it says election fraud has changed an election or is a serious problem.
So in other words, you don't care. Well, a little minor stealing probably won't
We've
put a
got
bit.
other things we need
So in
to
other
worry
words,
about.
Walmart's big enough. A little minor stealing here and there is okay. We should just allow it.
This
as
isn't
long as they're
Walmart.
not stealing a
This
lot
isn't
from them,
Walmart.
right?
If anybody's stealing, why shouldn't we stop it if we know that we can?
Oh, yeah, I think we should, and that's what we've got the laws for. But at the same time, we don't want to do something that is going to take something away from someone, such as we're talking in this, elderly voting.
How important is it for people to be able to read in the country? Should we ban books?
Well, I think we ought to have it to where everyone reads. I think we ought to have
Well,
it to where
then why
everyone
does the
has,
library
excuse
require
me, John,
a
I think
photo
we ought to have
ID?
it to where everybody ought to have health care.
Why does the library require a photo ID? Aren't you incensed?
I don't have a photo ID.
Aren't you incensed at
I have a local card, and it says public ID, and it has my name on it. I
You
guess
don't have
my
a
wife
driver's
could use
license.
it. I have my driver's
Well,
license.
that's a photo ID.
But I don't believe I had to do that when I got my. Of course, I've had a library card for some time, but. Can we, before we leave, can we talk about one thing that I think we all will agree upon? We were discussing this earlier. I had the pleasure, my wife and I, and of course she drags me out into these things, to work the Ironman competition that took place this past weekend in Chattanooga. And if there's things that appall you, if there's things that just disgust you, if there's things that just make you sick and will wake you up in the middle of the night, prior to the race, somewhere in Walker County, Georgia, and this is not a Georgia problem, this is everywhere, somebody went and put a bunch of oil on the route that the bikes were going to be running, and you've got 2,500 people running through this, along with tacks on the road. As long as that being just something other that isn't funny, it's very, very dangerous. And hopefully we all can agree this isn't a Republican problem. This isn't a Democrat problem. This is just something done by the least of us. And hopefully if anybody's out there that knows anything about this and hears this, they'll say something or bring it together. And hopefully anyone that might think about it, hopefully this will give them some pause, and they'll think of something else better to do than try to hurt some people just trying to go out and bring something. And this really brought something to Chattanooga. I was inspired by working it, and so I'm looking forward to working it next year.
Things like this happen, and I think it's just part of the standards that some people are raised under. If you don't have any standards to look up to people or to respect anything, this is the kind of stuff that happens. They go out. Why do you think somebody poured oil and put tacks on the road down there? Do you think it was just a bunch of kids trying to be cute? Do you think it was some adults that was upset because they had to go a different route than they're used to going to get to where they're going?
We have allowed over the last 30 or 40 years a culture of it's all about me to kind of crop up. And so, unfortunately, people look at this and go, hey, I believe that'd be funny. Now, never mind that you're going to destroy something that someone's worked a year to try and get their body in shape to do as an accomplishment. Never mind that you might actually physically severely injure somebody. Hell, I just want to do it because, part of the problem is we as a culture have told everybody you should be entitled to do whatever you want. And so some of this is a product of that. Some of it is a product of just age old. There are crappy people in the world that do crappy things.
I know when I was a kid, I'm going to tell on myself. When I was a kid, we had a little thing over in the neighborhood. We got to having some fun egging cars.
Yeah, that was
when they came by. But I never will forget, somebody got a glimpse of me, I think. He went down to my mother's. He got my mother and told me I was down here egging cars. And I never will forget the wrath came down upon me after that. And there was no more egging of cars, I promise you. But I learned my lesson, so I don't know. Sometimes it's the way you're raised.
I've had the pleasure for going on 28, 29 years to work with juveniles and be in juvenile court and see things, and there's some lost souls. There's some lost souls out there.
There's a lot of lost souls out there, and I think and actually by what you just said, I think that is a lot of the problem in our entire country right now.
That being
lost souls. There's people that are brought into this world that shouldn't have been brought into this world, and they've had they've had no one guide them and direct them properly.
Well, let's see if you're active in the Boys and Girls Club. Isn't that what they work to try and provide?
That's exactly right.
When you see someone and all you need is they just want someone to just grab them and say, that's the way you need to go.
That's right.
And when you see that and they need just a little bit more, it's very difficult.
Of course, this bounces into all kinds of areas, though. We don't have any kind of discipline in our schools like we used to have. Mr. Farr at Arnold School paddled me with a big wooden paddle with holes drilled in it.
Yeah.
Well, God forbid we do that anymore.
Mr. Ross used to paddle me.
And hopefully in your next show you'll talk a little bit more about social services. I think it'd be great and I know we have social services and they're underpaid, overworked, and underloved. But
the real problem is
in
the 6 years this president's been in office, we've had a greater need for social services because more and more people are unemployed, more and more people are out of a job. They're suffering under this economic policy.
This came up at a meeting I was at yesterday, and I'm going to ask you your opinion. You too, John. All right, now then, you've got unemployment, and you've got let's say that you sign up for disability. Disability seems to be going crazy right now. Everybody's signing up for that. But now they've got a new one where you can be drawing disability, and you can go out and you can work part-time and still earn up to $800 a month. Now, I was talking to another attorney, and he said that, that's where they're trying to encourage people to get back into the workforce and some of these type things by offering them the $800, even while they're drawing disability and some of these type things. And we talked about it a little bit. And, why should you pay anything for disability? Why should you pay any extra money to someone to work while they're on disability? You're either on disability or you're not on disability. Yes or no?
The problem is these programs get so huge. Steve, you'd want to say, because I do think one of the problems with welfare is, why would you work if you can get paid not to work? And now Bill Clinton, during his time, he had to be drug kicking and screaming to it, but he actually was very successful with the Republican Congress in actually reducing the welfare rolls by some of the very things I'm talking about. We said, look, if you'll get out and get a job, we're going to reduce your payment, but we're going to let you make more. The problem with the disability thing is it a temporary disability that they're collecting? Because Social Security disability, as far as I understood it, if it was a permanent disability, you draw that for the rest of your life. You don't ever get off that.
That's right.
Well, I don't know. In that case, if you have a permanent disability and you're drawing a permanent disability payment, I don't see why you would allow them to then go out and work, because if you can work, you shouldn't be drawing a permanent disability check.
That's right.
Steve, I had the pleasure to have various people work with me through the years. Pretty good bit. I guess that shows how good of boss I can be from time to time, but some of them, or two in particular, were raised in public housing. They would not be here today if it wasn't for social services coming in, giving them housing and helping them out. So we can point to welfare fraud. We can get to that. But I've just seen sort of the better parts of it. Now, I'm not really able to speak about the concept or why you would have disability and other payments, but if it's trying to get people out, trying to get them to work, try to get them involved, that may be a good idea. I don't know.
I have one last thing. We're running late and we need to go, but I've got to mention this. Should Al Sharpton have anything to do with finding a replacement for Eric Holder?
Well, he was the White House envoy to Ferguson. By the way, I have an update. Our excellent new district attorney has 2 ongoing election fraud cases as we speak in the district. In our district, there are 2 relatively substantial election fraud investigations going on as we speak. But again, apparently that's just an imaginary crime.
All right, I want to thank Ashley Ormby for coming in here this morning.
It's a pleasure. Y'all have been so nice.
And John Stanberry, thank you again. And we'll see you next week on Backfire. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Backfire with Steve Hickson, John Stanberry, and Franklin Chansey. Catch them again on Whoop FM at noon today and